Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study, the life of Peter. But first, we want to talk about the life of his little brother, Andrew. I say Andrew is his little brother because he's always mentioned second, and that's almost certainly the case, that Peter would be the older brother. Peter and Andrew were fishermen. Peter owns a boat on the Sea of Galilee. They were working class, but they had some means because they owned a boat and they were not just denarius a day laborers. They had some means because they owned a boat and they were in partnership with James and John. John is always mentioned last as well in connection with his brother James, which makes us think that James is the older brother and John is the younger brother. What we know about Andrew, we know about from John. That's what we know. All we know about Andrew otherwise is that he is Peter's younger brother, and he's the second apostle mentioned in the list of apostles: Peter, Andrew, James, John. But at the end of the first century, John is an old man. He just he just makes sure we know about some people that we don't know enough about yet from the first three gospels. People like Mary and Martha of Bethany, people like Judas himself, people like Nicodemus, and 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 his fellow little brother. When the four of them were together working on the job, James and Peter were the big brothers, and he and Andrew were the little brothers. And he's the one who tells us about Andrew. And and we get three stories about Andrew. And John, almost like a writer of operas, uses leitmotifs and has certain themes that he attaches to characters. And so that and he's not making things up. He just sees these themes in their lives. And I think about a perfect example would be, and what I'm talking about is like in Star Wars when Darth Vader enters, we know his music. Bum 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 ba bum bum ba bum. When certain characters are there, they're doing something that is characteristic of their discipleship. So every time we meet Mary of Bethany, and this goes back to Luke's gospel as well, Luke chapter 10. She's at the feet of Jesus three times, and she's at the feet of Jesus. We meet Andrew three times, and three times he's bringing someone to Jesus. That's his theme, that's his leitmotif. That's what we need to learn about him as a disciple of Jesus. What is characteristic of him is that he's always bringing someone to Jesus. We're told in John chapter 1, and this is really the passage about John the Baptist, that before anybody of the apostles know Jesus, Andrew and it seems Philip. Philip isn't named until later on in the text, but it seems like he's one of the two that are mentioned here. Andrew and Philip are disciples of John the Baptist, and it is John who personally connects Jesus and Andrew. It says in chapter 2 or chapter 1 verse 35, again the next day John was standing with two of his disciples. He looked upon Jesus as he walked and he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of or behold the Lamb of God, excuse me." And the two disciples heard him speak and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and said, and saw them following, and they said, what do you seek? And they said to him, Rabbi. So they're claiming him as a teacher. They said to him, Rabbi, where are you staying? And he said, come and you will see. And they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day. It was about the 10th hour, which Roman time, about 10 in the morning, Roman time, our time, about the 10th hour. And one of the two who heard John speak and who followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And he first found his own brother Simon, and he said to him, we have found the Messiah, which translated means Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas, which translated is Peter, which translated into English means rock. So they're disciples of John the Baptist. They follow Jesus. They claim Jesus as rabbi. And then they spend the day with Jesus. They immediately know Jesus is the Messiah. And Andrew, the first thing he does is to go find his older brother and say, we found the Messiah, and you have to come meet him. and he brings him to Jesus, and then Jesus changes Peter's name. So he brought Peter to Jesus. It's important for us to remember later on when we talk about Peter, especially when we talk about his confession, that he was introduced to Jesus as the Messiah. The next time we have a story about Philip is another well-known story it's reported in all four Gospels. It's the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6. And in John chapter 6, it's John chapter 6 we learn where the loaves and fishes come from. Because when Jesus um, challenges the disciples to come up with some way to feed this crowd, Philip is the one who says, "Where are we to buy bread that these may eat?" And and or Jesus says this to Philip, and Philip says, 200 denarii worth of bread isn't enough. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here, and he has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these among so many people?" And of course, Jesus takes this one little boy's lunch, it's literally his first century Lunchable, you know, and and feeds 5,000 people. But it was Andrew who brings this little boy to Jesus. It's Andrew's, I want to say creative thinking, but it's not creative thinking, it's faith thinking. What will Jesus do with this? I don't know, but let's find out. Who brings this little boy to Jesus and makes this miracle? He has agency in the performing of this miracle by bringing this boy to Jesus. The last time we meet Andrew, particularly, is in John chapter 12. And this is the passage where Jesus says, um, um, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. Verse 32, right before his crucifixion, he says this. This is the one where the Father speaks from heaven, identify for the last time, identifying that Jesus is his. And anyway, um, but this whole episode starts when in verse 20, there are certain Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast, and they came to Philip. Philip and Andrew again connected. They're connected in all three instances. Come to Philip and began asking him, "We wish to see Jesus." Philip came to Andrew, and Andrew and Philip came and told Jesus. And so, again, Andrew is someone who is bringing someone to Jesus. Now, that might seem like a minor detail, but it's part of the larger theme, the leitmotif. Every time we see Andrew, he's bringing someone to Jesus. And that's what we know about Andrew. And that's important to know about Andrew. Um, how did he die? We don't know. Historically, he is associated with a variety of mission works, but um, historically, the best information that we have, and it's sketchy at best, but the best information that we have was that at some point in the AD 50s, early 60s, he converted the Roman governor of Achaea's wife, and the governor was enraged that his wife became a Christian and had Andrew crucified on an X cross. Now that's tradition, and that's the little bit of historical information that we have, which is not necessarily that reliable, but it's the oldest information that we have. Well, that's what we know about Andrew. I'm an older brother, but I do feel for Andrew because, as we will find out, it's going to be Peter, James, and John, not Peter, Andrew, James, and John. So many places. Andrew gets left out. Um, but he doesn't feel that way. Or if he does, he never acts on it because he is a faithful servant of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus who continues to bring people to Jesus, whether he gets included or not. Okay. Thank you for joining me in another 5 good minutes. We'll start in the text about Peter next time. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.